Hey guys, welcome to the first in a series of videos I'm going to call, you call this archaeology. You know, it's spring and there's going to be a whole crop of new anthropology students getting into CRM. And I figured, why not come up with a series that answers some of the more basic questions about, or actually not some of the more basic questions, but some of the things that confuse people who get into CRM thinking that they are getting into archaeology. Archaeology is a small part of CRM, but, it's a beast all its own. So, first off, thanks to my first guest, Chris Webster, and thanks to any future guests I'm going to have, because this will be a multi-part series. In addition, as much as I hate to admit it, God, I really hate to admit it, your eyes do not deceive you. It is slightly out of focus. It's been a while since I've recorded one of these, and I totally forgot that my lens resets itself every time I turn off and turn on the camera, so I thought it was in focus, but it wasn't. Also, my camera has a super tiny view screen, and I had to set it super far away to get us both in the frame. So, without further ado, welcome to the first part of you call this archaeology. Survey. No, part one survey. Ha. Alright, no take twos on this one. Alright, junior archaeologist, how are you guys? I'm your host, the Man in the Hat, and welcome to another Happy Archaeology Fun Time video. Joining me today is Chris Webster of the, the Archaeology Podcast Network, I guess?
Yeah, and of Big Tech.
Ah, that's true. Alright, and let's see, today I thought I'd talk about some obvious questions that people always have when they get into CRM. Like, basically the main complaints, the stuff that makes people go, God damn it, this isn't archaeology. And today's theme was, since when is walking around and looking for stuff archaeology? Especially if you're out here in the West. Or since when is walking around and digging up holes at what seems like random intervals archaeology? Or any of the other stuff we do for survey, because, supposedly archaeology is always about digging up crap and putting it in storerooms and losing all the paperwork. Mm-hmm.
But, out here, and it depends on what you call survey and excavating too, because True. Like on the East Coast, if you're doing shovel testing, are you excavating? Yes, you are, yeah. But you're also doing survey. Yeah. So you have to define the terms. So survey is an initial reconnaissance of an area, although there can be a recon, which is completely different, but more of an intuitive survey as a recon. But so survey, whether you're shovel testing or pedestrian survey, just walking in the desert, is survey, but excavation is more block excavation, 1 by 1 meter units. Even if it's just testing, it's excavation. So most projects out here in the West, and I'll speak for Nevada because it's my experience, but most projects out here in Nevada never go to excavation. Oh. They just don't. We find out most of what we need to know from our survey, and the reason a lot of these sites that even are eligible or potentially eligible for listing on the National Register, they may not go to excavation because they're so far out. Like there's so much land out here. The agencies and the clients working on will say, let's survey 3,000 acres out here. Okay, we can't dig in this one little area, so we'll just move our operation. Now, sometimes when you're talking about like natural gas wells, they've got an area of maybe 500 to 1,000 feet, depending on how big the field is, where they can do exploratory drilling. So they'll just move their pad. And then we've done that before. But if it's a huge site, then you're going to have to pick a place within that site for them to put their pad, and then you might have to do further work there.
Or they're just putting like a big pipeline through an area where you can't avoid stuff.
Right, exactly. Sometimes you just can't avoid it. Right. So if it's a pipeline, it's linear, you're going through it. Now, that being said, I worked on the Ruby pipeline, and that had a 200 meter wide corridor, and in some cases we moved that pipeline a mile. Because they would say, they started getting smart with it, and they started realizing where the archaeology sites might be. But in some of those areas, like north of Winnemucca, there were some areas there where, you know, they would move it. We'd have to go resurvey the new alignment, and we'd still find the sites. You know, because we had a bunch of sites that looked like this. They were like a mile long and had perfectly straight sides, 200 meters apart. Trust me, the site doesn't look like that. So they would move it, and then they would move it, and then they would move it. So you'd have this huge meandering thing, and eventually, in some areas, they just say, okay, let's go out and excavate it and see what we can find. But the answer to the question is, we can tell a lot of information from survey. We can tell the basic size of a site. We can tell the basic components of a site. We can tell, I mean, whether you're shovel testing or pedestrian survey, doesn't matter. We can find out a lot about the site. Now, if you have to excavate, typically you'll find out a lot more information because it's a 100% recovery. It's also 100% destruction, so we'd rather not do it.
I mean, it's like that monitor we were talking to, was it Eagle? Who said he appreciated the fact that we, you know, preserve sites now instead of just wanted to dig up all this shit.
Right. And preservation, to go off topic a little bit, can be a number of things. Preservation can be a parking lot.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody knows the site's under there, I mean, Richard III was preserved under a parking lot for how long? So.
And yet, according to students and looters, like, the only way to preserve it is to dig it up, which is bullshit.
Which is absolute bullshit. There's many mitigation strategies for a site. And you know, whether it's rerouting the project or putting a fence around it or covering it over with something else, if the site's deep enough, you can, like, I know working on the East Coast, there were, you know, it's all sand out there. And we actually, my wife, when she was an archaeologist, they did this auger testing project because they'd found some stuff on the surface that was interesting. Yeah. So they wanted to auger down and find out what was in the subsurface. Well, they found a lot of like woodland and archaic stuff, and then they got into like pre-archaic, like paleo-archaic down way below, 3 or 4 meters down in these auger tests. They were finding this stuff. So since the stuff up above was determined to be not important enough for that area because there's plenty of examples of it, and the money just wasn't there to just go 3 meters down in an excavation, they basically backhoed all that top stuff out. But that was based on the auger testing surveys where they found stuff. Then they got down into the paleo stuff and excavated finally down there. So. But that's just, my point is, if the money wasn't there to excavate the paleo stuff, we know it's there. We know that the other stuff is not as important. If the agency says, okay, if you're putting in a Walmart here and you need to take out 2 meters, don't go below 2 meters, pour your foundation, and the paleo stuff will be preserved underneath it. We have it recorded, we know it's there. If and when this building gets destroyed and we put something else in, we'll monitor it and we'll excavate the paleo stuff. But that's preservation. Preservation can be a Walmart.
God, you know, I was just thinking, maybe that's what they ought to teach in Archaeology 101 is preservation techniques, not necessarily CRM.
It should be a bullet point at the very least. You know, it should be talked about and said, you know, these are the other mitigation strategies. I actually learned that in my master's program in environmental law class. That was one of the things we learned. So the different strategies for, you know, mitigating. I mean, this was a generic environmental law class that we had to take, but wasn't necessarily focused on archaeology, but it was talking about mitigation strategies for all historic resources. You know, whether it's creating a district. When you create a district somewhere, that puts certain restrictions on development and you know, improvements to properties. You know, if you call this a historic district, you can't make your home look ultra modern. You have to keep it in line with the district. Wow, even here in Nevada? I didn't know there were laws. Oh yeah, there's plenty of districts right here in downtown Reno. I don't know, you probably can't see this house behind us here, but that's totally protected. So these mansions up along the Truckee are all protected. So the two major federal laws that warrant archaeological survey, and if Tom King happens to be watching this, he would certainly have some things to say. Because these laws don't mandate archaeology necessarily, they mandate cultural resources assessments, they mandate you know, evaluating heritage and cultural resources, and that involves a lot of things, and just one tiny little facet of that is survey. Okay, it's a part of a whole big package, and that's what people need to understand. And obviously these two laws are the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and I always forget the date on that. It's in the 60s. And then there's the National Historic Preservation Act, which is 1966. And those both in their own unique way, tend to invoke some sort of survey occasionally. Now, you've also got, in different areas, like in California, you've got CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, that mandates survey all over California, and supersedes, actually, it's a tighter restriction than NHPA and NEPA. So, you know, if you're doing something in California, if you do it to CEQA standards, you're already doing it to NEPA and NHPA standards.
I feel like that.
So California has CEQA, and I'm not familiar with other states' requirements, but there are often, maybe not often, but there are other states that have, and possibly even local municipality levels that have tighter regulations on cultural resources. So they can't be looser than the federal regulations.
Oh, because I figured that's what they'd want.
Well, sure, they can do that, but you have to abide by the federal, so that would be useless, you know. So they can be tighter though, and that's usually what you'll find. So you have to have a knowledge of that. Again, at the field tech level, it's good to have the understanding of why you're out there. It's not necessary, but it's good to have that understanding.
But I mean, I also feel like it leads to frustration. People don't know what they're doing, and no one ever explains it to you what you're doing.
Well, you never get the big picture.
No.
Yeah.
And I also feel like people don't understand we're under deadlines. Like, some field techs want to spend forever, especially if they're new, looking for every single flake, even though you're just trying to locate it and figure out how big it is and what's there.
Well, sometimes your deadlines are important too, you know, because if you're not conscious of the deadline and supportive of the deadline and understanding that there is a deadline and a time frame, then you're simply going to be out of a job.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you're going to be in CRM, you can't naively think, well, if I just go slow, I'll be employed longer.
Yeah, but that's what everyone thinks.
I know.
From the beginning.
But you have to play the game. If you're going to be in CRM, you have to play the game. Just like if you're doing an academic project, you've got to stay on budget. I mean, you're given a limited amount of funds with your grant money or whatever, and you've got to stay within that, and you've got to account for every single penny. Well, the same thing is in CRM, and if you're not going to play that game, then you're not going to last very long, or you're going to be unhappy the entire time that you're in it.
Or it's like,
right. Well, there's other things you do for time management on these sites as well. Like if you come to a site, because basically on these sites, whether they're prehistoric or historic, job one out here in Nevada is figuring out whether or not the site is eligible or not for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So if you get to a site, you find something, or you determine early on that it's eligible, you can probably get away with minimal recording because
come back.
You can either come back to it, or it's going to be avoided.
Yeah.
You know, so if it's eligible for listing, the client has to either avoid it or pay you to come back and do more research. So you don't have to record every tiny little artifact if you know it's eligible. It depends on the circumstance. If that site is not eligible, but it still has some interesting things on it, then yes, record as much detail as you possibly can, because no one in the world may ever see that site again.
Yeah.
Okay. And you never know what future technologies are going to be, what future analysis there will be. Sure, it might not be important right now, but somebody may be able to put this into a meta-analysis of sites all across the region, and then you'll have as much detail as you possibly can. But if it's eligible, you know, record what's important. Record the stuff that might get destroyed by looters or, you know, ranchers or whoever's going to come through there. If you don't have the bigger picture, ask. Try to get the bigger picture. Some crew chiefs will be assholes and not tell you, but it's probably because they don't know either.
Or you can just look up Section 106.
Yeah, well, you can look up the basic laws, but then to find out what's actually going on the project that you're on, you really need to ask somebody on that project, because, like, for example, I'm doing some projects for the U.S. Navy here this year. We are following Section 106 regulations to record these projects, but they're on Navy land, so the ultimate authority is the Navy. They determine how we proceed. They determine what we do. Now, they're working within the Section 106 framework of the National Historic Preservation Act, but they can modify it.
All right, so, you know, every field techs always want to record every last little detail in the site records, but what are you actually responsible for in terms of, like, you know, and some field techs are like, you know, 30 meters is too wide. Like, you know, that's way too wide. We should be like 2 meters apart. We should be like touching.
Right.
So what are your actual, like, responsibilities in the law?
Well, your responsibilities, again, are determined by the agency that you're working for and the state that you're working in. So if the agency determines that you're doing a basic, what we call class 3 out here anyway. There's different terminology for that across the country, but we call it class 3 cultural resources inventory, where you're basically just seeing what's out there. And you're not, the reason people get tripped up is because if we find a single artifact, we'll record that as an isolate. If we find in Nevada 2 artifacts within 30 meters, we'll record that as a site, okay? So everybody thinks that every artifact needs to be recorded when it comes down to that. But in reality, the reason we're separated by 30 meters, or in some cases 25 meters or whatever, is because the agency wants to know what are the major sites out there. And the likelihood of a site being oblong in between your 2 transects is so small that it's not worth considering. So chances are you're going to clip the edge of some bigger site, and the whole point is to record these bigger resources, because really there's probably flakes every 10 meters if you really had some sort of instrument, Star Trek style, that could figure that out across the entire state of Nevada.
Oh God, even worse, there's like a can every like 5 meters.
Oh my God, forget about it. Yeah, we think we find everything on sites. We don't find everything.
No, it's impossible. That's why I tell people when they're like, all right, we're done looking around. It's like, we found enough.
Well, and the typical percentage that I've heard tossed around, you have to do the math to figure it out, but when you're walking a transect, you're probably looking, being super generous, you're probably looking at about a 2 meter wide path.
Yeah.
Okay? Being super generous, when in reality, most people are probably looking straight in front of them or at their GPS, right?
Yeah.
So,
or trying not to get killed.
Over. So you're looking right in front of you. So really, you're maybe looking at a meter wide path. But like I said, being generous, we'll say a 2 meter wide path. So 2 meters out of, the 30 meters, you're already knocking a meter off each side. So you're down to 28 meters in the middle between you guys that nobody's looking at, which is kind of one reason why I weave a little bit when I walk. Yeah.
Sometimes not intentionally, but sometimes it happens.
Sometimes it just happens, yeah. But it's also why I'm not too concerned with staying on my transect, exactly right on my transect. If I'm within, I call it good if I'm within 3 or 4 or 5 meters of the line. I don't look at my GPS all the time. That's why I use my compass still.
Same here.
Because, I'll just pick a point out in the distance and kind of walk towards that. Every once in a while, I'll look at the GPS to make sure I'm close to my whatever interval I'm supposed to be on.
And yet there are always those people who get super angry. You're off your line.
I know.
What are you doing? Don't ever come off your line.
They just lose focus. They forget why we're doing this. Yeah. And so the you got, like I said, you have to know what the agency's requirements are for what you're looking for. And if they're just doing a basic inventory, then you're fine. Just getting those things. But ethically, when we do find something, we record it, which is why we record these isolates and these two artifact scatters, as sites. Because if we find it, we can't just say, oh, it's not big enough, let's move on. Thing that we find, we record. But like I said, that doesn't say that you're just going to record necessarily everything on a site. That's why if you have a big can scatter or something like that on a historic site, if it's an isolated or a discrete bordered can dump, you'll sample it. We don't need to count every single artifact in there, but we can average it. We could say, it's about this many.
And yet we always run into people who do.
Yeah, well, and I understand that mentality from a scientific point of view, but from a cultural resource management point of view, there's no point in it.
Yeah, because it's about resource management, not about, we're not going to come back and study it.
Especially if it's eligible. Characterize it, get it down so somebody else can come back and do something else with it. If it's not eligible, what I would do is say like a can dump or something like that is I would sample an area and then I would go through and pick out uniques as well. Like if there was a can that wasn't in my sample area, but I only see like 1 or 2 of them, I would record one of those.
So would you make it like an artifact?
Possibly. If it's diagnostic or unique enough and diagnostic, then I would give it an artifact number so we record more information about it. But yeah, I mean, again, everything always depends on the regulations of the agency you're working for. So, for example, here in Nevada, the BLM publishes specific guidelines on the different types of archaeology you can do, the surveys, excavations, stuff like that. They say 30 meters, no more than 30 meter transects. All the regulations say no more than 30 meters, but everybody just does 30 meters. Like nobody does 10. They say no more than, but everybody's like, okay, 30, done. Really, you should do like 25, so you're not more than 30.
True.
Yeah.
Oh God, that is true, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really going to be ethical about it. But Anyway, if you're
We're not made of money.
well, right? I mean, there's on a big enough survey, if you cut down 10 meters or 5 meters off of each transect, I mean, you could easily add tens of thousands of dollars to the project. So, you know, there's budgets to consider, unfortunately. And you can bitch and moan about money in archaeology, but that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
So you either work in the system or you don't.
Plus, people always complain about money, and then they complain that you know, people look at archaeology as a hobbyist field. It's like,
Right.
you can't have it both ways.
Right. Yeah, so the other part of the question, reporting requirements, you know, again, that's determined by whoever you're working for. What do they want? What's in the contract? What are the deliverables? For BLM jobs here in Nevada, the deliverables are a draft report and a final report with recommendations. So you turn in your draft report. There's always requirements on that. Like it's typical that the draft report has to be within 30 to 90 days, depending on the size of the project, at the end of the field work.
Yeah.
The field work takes X amount of time. You have to tell them that too on an estimate. But then you have to have the draft report in within a certain amount of time, and then you have to have the final report done within a certain amount of time of receiving comments back from the draft report. So the BLM will make comments on your draft report and then say, fix this, add this, do whatever, or it looks good. And if it's my case, then they say nothing needs to be changed and it's perfect. I have yet to receive comments on a report I've turned in. I've only done a few, but you know.
Even for other companies?
Well, for other companies, there's almost always comments because there's so many people working on it. You know, there's almost never one person at a big company working on a report. You know, one person might do big sections of the report, but it's almost, something's going to get missed when you have 10 people working on different parts of the report throughout the life cycle of the report.
So basically the client doesn't have anything. We're just not like mouthpieces for like an oil company or a mining company.
The client won't even see the report if it's BLM land.
Yeah.
The client can't see the report. They're not permitted archaeologists.
That's why I love it when people say that Keystone EIR is like, oh, that's just created by the, you know, that oil company. It's like, you know, they're not in it.
Yeah.
They have no control over it.
Yeah, they control the money, and they're paying for it. But aside from that, the agency, if it's on public land, the agency determines everything else about it. And I can't speak for other states, but here in Nevada, you need to have a BLM cultural resource use permit to do archaeology here, and to even see previously recorded site records at the BLM district office. You need to have all those permits, and since clients don't typically have those permits unless they hire an archaeologist to manage the project for them, which some of the bigger mines do. They do that so they can have this information. You know. Reporting requirements, like BLM has here in Nevada, has a strict template for how your report will look. In fact, I just heard of a company, a small husband and wife team. They were talking about a report they turned in, and they had a section named the way they wanted it named, and not the same exact title that's in the BLM guidelines. And the BLM archaeologist called him back when he was reviewing their draft report and said, "You missed this section entirely." Clearly, didn't read the whole thing. But he said, "You missed this section entirely," and they're like, "No, it's in there. It's just called this." And he's like, "Oh, okay, change the name." So they had that section, but you know, they say this is what your report will contain. Here's your outline. Fill in these sections.
I wonder if
that they have a similar process as human resources departments do when they have 400 applications come in for one position. They'll take a quick look at each one, and they'll go through them several times and say, "Okay, these were done on, you know, construction paper with crayons. We're throwing them in the trash. I don't care if they're the CEO of Pepsi. I'm throwing in the trash." So, you know, they go through that way, and then they'll go through looking for format and content. They'll throw all those away. They haven't even read your name yet, you know. And I'm sure the BLM has a similar process to their reports. They probably go through, make sure all the elements of the report are there first before they read the thing. And I'm willing to bet they don't read the thing from cover to cover. There just isn't time. It's not a slight on their ethics. There just isn't time.
Yeah.
So if they make sure all the sections are there, make sure all the maps look right, make sure all the, you know, they'll probably drill down until they hit mistakes. And if they hit something big, they'll probably just call you up and say, "Hey, you need to fix this," and send us back a copy. But
that does sound like that leaves a lot of leeway for people who like to paste and copy a lot.
yeah, well, and there's nothing wrong with copying and pasting either, as long as you know what you're doing. You can't just willy-nilly copy and paste like companies I've seen before copy and paste their bibliography into another report, and half the citations in the bibliography are not even in the report.
Oh, or they're talking about the history of the wrong county.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The BLM wants context in all of their reports, their positive reports. Negative reports don't need it, but positive reports need context for where you're at, and it's common for companies to have a context written up as long as it's current, and just copy and paste that in. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time you need to talk about the Washoe Valley.
No, because everyone kind of knows about that around
Yeah.
here.
Now, if there's, like, for example, the company Richie and I used to work for, our prehistoric context, I noticed when I first started working there, wasn't up to date to represent what was being found at Paisley Caves in Oregon.
Oh.
So I updated it.
Yeah.
You know, and I included that reference to include that material, and that's what you should do. You should stay abreast of the current material and update your context accordingly. Now, a lot of this stuff, you know, like Richie said, the context probably isn't going to change that much.
Sure.
What else I have to say on that? Again, all these things come down to who you're working for and what their requirements are. If you're working for a private client in California, you may not even be required to turn in a report. They might just want your recommendations. You know, can we or can we not dig on this land?
Because that's like the most basic, fundamental thing of what we're doing, isn't it?
Well, that's what they want to know. All the client wants to know is, can we proceed or not? And if we can't, how much is it going to cost us? That's done. I just described all of CRM across the entire world.
Yeah.
Well, that's why often you'll turn in, before the draft report's even done, you'll turn in a management summary or a letter report of the findings. I mean, it can be a 5,000 acre survey where you found 300 sites, but within 5 days of finishing the field work, you'll turn a letter report into the BLM that says, we found this many sites, this many are eligible, here's where they're at, here's where the sites are that we found, here's the previously recorded sites that we updated, and here's our recommendations. They'll give that to the client. They'll sign that off. You'll give that to the client, or they'll give that to the client, and the client will start development.
Yeah, or not necessarily even development. Like,
or they'll do whatever they got to do.
Yeah.
They have notice to proceed.
Yeah.
Based on that, the BLM will give them the notice to proceed based on that, or whatever agency you're dealing with. You may not have the report done for 6 months, and some companies won't have the report done ever. And this is why that happens. That happens because no one's paying for it anymore.
No.
You know, I mean, the client is still obligated to pay you for it, but it's happened in the past that clients will stop paying for it and just go to court over it because they're done. You know, they've already put up their building, and you're bitching about $20,000. Again, it doesn't happen all the time, and the sheer number of projects that happen in this country, you know, it's like plane crashes. Plane crashes are bad when they happen, but they don't happen very often.
True.
You know, compared to there's 20,000 planes in the air right now over the country. How many of them are going to crash today? Probably none.
None.
Yeah. So.
All right. So, hopefully that answers some of the new people's questions about why this is archaeology.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and if there's something we didn't cover, you can always find it on the CRM Archaeology Podcast on the Archaeology Podcast Network.
True. Oh, I was going to ask you what you were up to and where they can find you.
Well, we've got the Archaeology Podcast Network, which is at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. There's currently 7 shows on there. We just added another one. The CRM Archaeology Podcast is specifically focused on these types of issues. Some of the other podcasts touch on them, but they all have their own focus. And you can find those on iTunes and Stitcher Radio as well. And
hopefully SoundCloud at some point.
Maybe SoundCloud ever changes their requirements.
Oh, really? They have requirements?
Well, they have upload limits for free accounts.
Oh,
and we do 7. We have like 15 episodes a month that we upload.
Wow.
Yeah, and SoundCloud won't allow that unless you're a paid account.
And plus, you've got your Foursquare stuff, or whatever, your website hosting, or whatever.
Oh, Squarespace.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there's that. Twitter at ArcheoWebby, ARCHEO. I can't remember why I did that, but I did it. And then the Archaeology Podcast Network is ArcPodNet on Twitter.
And then I think you have a Facebook group?
Facebook group, we have a Facebook page for Archaeology Podcast Network.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Go like that page. And and then I actually moderate the Archeo Field Techs group where we talk about a lot of this stuff, and the North American Archaeological Field Tech Forum, or Tech Forum, or whatever it is.
And a lot of new people have been finding like stuff through there, have been asking questions.
Yeah, there's been a lot of really good questions asked and answered. I mean, sometimes somebody put a question up there, and I mean, they'll have 90 comments because archaeologists like to talk.
Like, what was the last one I just saw? Like, someone was asking about a field camera, and then someone said, you should just buy a tablet, and it's like...
Nice. Yeah, I missed that one.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, tablet is a terrible idea for a field camera.
Right. Depends on the tablet, though.
True.
There's some tablets out there with high megapixel cameras on the back.
Oh no, well I mean, I just meant like, the big scratchy face.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's not very durable compared to a small digital camera.
Although Sony just did introduce a new tablet that's waterproof.
Oh, there you go.
And a phone. And let's see, as for me, you can find me at Twitter. I forgot my Twitter name, but it's in the show description.
I
I am also...
have to say it out to know your Twitter name. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, that's true. Although I know yours offhand since I always see your posts. But let's see. I've got a Facebook page that is also in the show description, and you can. Well, I guess I shouldn't say you can find me, but I moderate the CRM Archaeology subreddit, and I'm sure other people look at that too. So if you want to ask questions directly, go to there because the Archaeology subreddit is kind of weird and for amateurs, near as I can tell. Sorry.
Right.
If you watch this show and you like that subreddit, blah. And thanks for watching. I'm the Man in the Hat. This has been Chris Webster. Oh, see you again. Hopefully we'll answer more questions, or I'll answer more questions, I guess.
See you in the field.
Yeah. Oh, I should go with this. I should go with this now. Anyway.